Hello friends, I am Rob here in the Lair of OmnusI, and today I'm going to be doing it's kind of a video response, but it's just kind of something I've been meaning to do for quite a while anyhow. I recently saw on another YouTuber, Eric's UK, he had this idea to make a video log through his gaming experience, detailing the different games that he had played, and I thought, that would be pretty useful. So I quickly made up a list of all the different games that I had played. And I've realized that my gaming experience as I've gone along has obviously changed through events in my life and the different games that I've experienced and the different players that I've played with and things like that. So it'd be useful to log those and kind of lay out my gaming credentials in a way, showing where I've come from, where I've gone, etc., etc. Now, not all of these games are made equally. There are some that have but a eye blink of my experience, and I'm just going to do a summary video of those at some point. But right now I'm going to start at the beginning, where it all began. Now, I'm not going to talk about the very first role-playing game I had in my hands. That was something that I just looked at and didn't really comprehend it as a game per se. And that was Moldvay's Dungeons & Dragons basic set, which my parents had gotten, but I was only 8 at the time and had nobody explain it to me or any of that. And while I read it and enjoyed it tremendously, I enjoyed the discussion of the monsters and what they were, and I really enjoyed the example of gameplay, I didn't have enough things to connect it with, and all the abbreviations and everything just lost me. So, I don't count that as my first experience, although I do kind of tie it in with my general love of role-playing because it did set me on the path. It made it so that Dungeons & Dragons was not an unknown commodity to me, and then later on I would get this. This bundle of papers is what's left of the red box basic Dungeons & Dragons player's guide, and I also have the expert set here, and a bunch of ripped off notes and things that I've used over the years. Now, those of you who are more familiar, this was the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, since then, I have reacquired those books. So I have the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide in much better shape, clearly, so that if I am ever going to introduce someone to this game, I can break out the old classics. And that is really how I started. I had a friend. He also had gotten into role-playing. We first met through video games, so Nintendo, NES system, and we played each other's houses. We enjoyed that. I enjoyed video games for a very long time. But when eventually we started talking about role-playing games, it was clear that he had the bug, and he passed it on to me. And then I asked for my birthday for that first set. Now, again, kind of reflecting on what these games have meant to me, the very first one I credit for a lot of my desire to play. The writing was easy to understand, and I credit Frank Menser for taking this game that has been criticized for being too wordy, too intellectual, too many barriers put between your average person and the kind of intellectuals with a lot of free time, like, you know, college students were always kind of lumped in the player base. And it was very approachable, and it explained all the things that I didn't get back in my first reading, which had been 5 years prior to that. So while I was in high school, I started on this basic set. Now I got it, and my friend went away to school, so I didn't have somebody really to play with. So what I did was I read through everything voraciously a couple of times, and I got a pretty good glimpse into what character creation was all about, because it had a very good description on how to make up characters. I understood classes and their various roles, and that's important to understand in a role-playing aspect. Not role-playing as in, this is my character, and I am going to talk as my character. No, it's understanding that a fighter stands in front of everybody and fights, and tries to draw enemies to himself where his superior armor can keep him alive long enough for the others to do what they would do. The cleric's role is to stay alive. If it means keeping the party alive, they can move up to fight, but it's really to stay alive so that you can get the experience to learn to heal people. Because first level clerics don't get healing spells. It's not until a little bit later. Your rogue's job is to break out your skills every once in a while and try to do something so the party can get by something nasty. Try to help out where you can, but don't do too much because you'll get squished very easily. A magic user's role? Nothing less than survive at all costs. Then when you get the experience, then the entire battlefield turns at your whim. And once you start getting more and more powerful, which doesn't happen in this basic set, it's not until the expert set that the magic users start to come into their power, but you suddenly become the center point of what the party can do. And the other roles, the halfling, the dwarf, and the elf, your race as a class. It was a weird thing for Dungeons and Dragons, but it does make sense in its own way. That culturally, the adventuring type of person is shaped in a particular way. If all elves love magic and can instinctively do magic, and all elves also with their lifespan would want to learn how to wear armor and weapons if they're going to expose themselves to danger, it makes a certain sense. Yeah, it makes about as much sense as some of the restrictions against certain races having certain classes in advanced Dungeons and Dragons, really. Why can elves and dwarves not have clerics? Surely they are sentient creatures and can summon enough faith. They have their own pantheons and deities. Why couldn't they have clerics who adventure just like humans do? It doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily until you understand they're just taking into account the general plurality of the culture. Now, I didn't understand any of that when I was in high school. It just was artificial limits to kind of structure your game experience. And with only those 4 basic classes and the 3 races, which were classes themselves, it basically meant there wasn't a lot of choices, which was good for somebody just starting out. You don't want to be overwhelmed with decisions necessarily, so this is very easy to pick up and run. Still one of the easiest role-playing games to this day that I've ever done. Now, my experience wasn't in playing this. As a matter of fact, to this day, I can't honestly remember playing Dungeons and Dragons. I've run it almost exclusively. I've had some very good stories with it. My high school years, my sophomore year of college when I was at a seminary, was defined a lot of the ways by that Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I ran. I made some great friends, including my best friend of all time, and told a fun story. And I actually threaded through a campaign with storyline elements. I really flexed my muscles and grew as a storyteller that way. And when, unfortunately, that campaign ended brutally when I was kicked out of the seminary, being honest here, ironic with the shirt I'm wearing, but it was one of those things that it defined what my gaming experience was like. This was awesome and the height of what I could do. I would transcend that later, I think clearly, but it's still important to know where your roots came from. And honestly, I owe a great deal to Frank Menser's compilation, which is why I've always given him kind of a pass on different things that, you know, the court of public opinion against Frank Menser's got quite a bit of stuff under it. But my personal take on it is that this book was brilliantly written with the idea of bringing all kinds of people from different walks of life into Dungeons and Dragons. From the art that just arrested your attention, it was fantastic. But at the same time, it was the Dungeons and Dragons experience, which means old school. You have a dungeon. You are inviting players to go into your dungeon and try to defeat the monsters. If you read the modules, they give you some idea of weaving a story into the dungeon. Here's a reason for the players to go into the dungeon, maybe a goal or two that they have to accomplish. The party goes into the dungeon to do just that. Whether it's as complicated as the Tomb of Horrors, which I know wasn't for Dungeons and Dragons, but honestly, there's really not a lot of difficulty in converting one to the other, as I did once or twice in that campaign, borrowing elements from other games. It was interesting, and as I said, it formed a lot of my opinion. Also, another side element, which is really only slightly mentioned in the DM's guide was the idea of taking the stuff that was in the book and making it your own. That's something I've always enjoyed doing. Tinkering, reskinning, and modifying things to fit a purpose. His idea was kind of silly. Taking a rock ape, giving it a mohawk and drumsticks, and making it a rock and roll ape. I really enjoyed doing that a lot in this system. So it was formative for me. It was a lot of my basis for my role-playing journey, and moved on from there. Was it the most significant to the way I am today? No. But without that, I don't know if I really would have gotten into role-playing the same way, or maybe had those connections with other people that I formed without this game. I still remember to this day very well when I was in the seminary and I was reading over the, I believe it was the expert set, and I heard somebody over my shoulder go, "Oh, you play that?" And I turned around and made a friend that day who also loved role-playing games, and then that brought me into the greater gaming community that was very, very much alive there at the seminary. So, Dungeons and Dragons is the core root of my gaming experience, laid out before you in this, my first of my games that I have played. So thank you for Eric's UK for your videos, and hopefully you enjoy this little snapshot into my gaming career. Thank you, and farewell.